Hello and good morning from Glasgow. I'm Alison Arnott and I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar on internal communications in times of crisis, which is one of the many things the CIPR are doing to support members through COVID-19. We have over 500 people registered today, so thank you very much for tuning in at this strange time. Today's webinar is free to all CIPR members and it carries 5 CPD points. The webinar will last probably around about half an hour and it's copyrighted to myself and to the CIPR, so shouldn't be copied or shown in other contexts without permission. And although we'll run a live Q&A on Twitter, the presentation element has been pre-recorded simply to reduce the risk of my 3-year-old son bursting in and taking over the show. So all that really means for you is that rather than typing your comments and questions in the chat box, I'd ask that you post them on Twitter using the hashtag and the handle on screen, and I'll reply and retweet in real time. And if you're listening to a recording of this recording, I'm happy to connect and I'm happy to answer any further questions either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about internal communications in times of crisis. We'll discuss the types of crisis you might face and the importance of internal comms in crisis scenarios before moving on to talking about different approaches to informing and engaging internal stakeholders in different channels, and we'll touch on subjects including content, messaging, spokespeople and channels. Okay, but it's probably important to start by talking a little bit about crisis comms itself. And probably by saying that crisis communication is not crisis management. So crisis management is the process of moving the whole organisation through the crisis situation to business recovery and back to business as usual, while crisis communication helps this process by keeping people informed and keeping them engaged. But having said that, it's useful for us as crisis communicators to have an understanding of the crisis theory and the scenarios we might face so that we can make an appropriate and well-judged response. Julian Garcia described a crisis as a potentially costly or harmful event that left to usual business processes and velocities causes significant reputational, operational or financial harm. And I actually think that's a really good definition. And I think it's good because it focuses on a couple of key words, being significant and being harm. As communicators, we need to be aware that there is a difference between a crisis and an issue, and a real crisis could have significant harmful impact to multiple stakeholders, and so it requires an emotional as well as a logical understanding if we are to come up with the best possible and most effective response. Another thing to remember is just like organisations, all crises are different. And they have different causes, they take different forms, and they impact upon your reputation in different ways. Sometimes they can be quite neatly labelled, as you can see here on the screen, and sometimes they're a bit of a complex mishmash of a whole lot of other things, so you want to be aware of that as well. And this means that the messages and channels that gather support in one situation could actually cause real bitterness and division in another. So the secret to getting your comms response right is to understand as much as you can about what happened, why it happened, and how people really feel about it. And I do have a handout just explaining some of the things on screen in a little bit more detail. So if you want to look into the sidebar just now, if you're interested in that handout, just download it from the sidebar just now and you'll be able to get some more information on the types of crisis that you might face. So however they're caused and however they play out, all crises do have something in common, and that's the fact that they attract attention. And so while I want to be really clear that no amount of great comms can or should whitewash deliberate organisational wrongdoings, how you actually deal with the attention that a crisis brings has a significant and long-standing impact on your reputation and on your ability to recover, which brings me to the importance of internal communications. More and more, when we look at organisations, we can see that reputation is shaped by information, culture and experience coming from within the organisation as well as outside of it. And as it's your people who sit at the heart of the crisis response, keeping them informed and engaged is absolutely crucial to the effort to protect your reputation. To participate effectively in the process of business recovery, all of your internal stakeholders must understand what's happening, what that means, and what they need to do things better, and what they need to do to make things better, but it's also important to remember that they're going to be asked their opinions and their personal experience by people inside and outside of the organisation, and the stories they tell in response will feel much more authentic and worthy of trust than the ones delivered by business leaders and lawyers. So effective internal communication also needs to try and make sure that people feel valued and part of the solution, that they have factual details that they feel comfortable to share, and they have positive stories that they feel proud to tell. Okay. So where do we start? Well, I spoke earlier about the need for a logical and an emotional understanding of what's happened. So when you're starting out, I would begin by working with colleagues in external comms and in operational functions to define what the problem actually is and to understand how it's likely to play out. Ask the difficult questions at this point to make sure that you really understand and can articulate what happened, why it happened, and what's being done to fix it, as well as how your people have been affected, how they're going to be feeling about that, and what role they'll be expected to play in the recovery. Remember that you're dealing with real egos, emotions, and agendas at every level in the organisation, and try to view your brief through the lens of all of your different stakeholder groups, including the crisis management team, including the operational functions most closely involved in the problems, and including the people most closely involved in the solutions, because they're all going to have slightly different perspectives, and it's really important for you to understand that. And finally, challenge your own assumptions as well. So get out there and see how different messages, channels and spokespeople are really going to be received in different situations, rather than just make an assumption that the messages that you have decided you're going to deliver are the ones that are going to work. Sense check them, ask people how they feel about them, and also ask people what they need, and understand the questions that they have at different times in the process and why they have those questions. Once you've got a clear understanding of the situation, you're going to also need to agree the strategic role that communications is going to play, and particularly the strategic role that internal communications is going to play. So you want to set some SMART objectives. Your objectives are the things that you want your communication to achieve, so don't just make them about activity, but instead think about what you want employee groups to know, and what you want them to feel, what you want them to do, and ask yourself why this matters from a strategic perspective. Remember that your role as an internal communicator is to support the wider crisis management team. So show really clearly how your internal comms objectives work as part of a wider stakeholder communication strategy, and how they support the needs of the crisis management team, and how they support the needs of the overall business strategy. And also think about the different people that you're going to be talking to at this point, and think about how you build their needs into your objectives. So if there is a little bit of extra effort, a little bit of deeper engagement, or more detailed messaging needed for certain groups of staff, you're going to want to make that clear at this time when you're setting your objectives. And then once you have the objectives in place and you've agreed them with the other people who are going to be delivering the crisis response, you want to think about your overall approach to communication, and what approach to communication is going to best help you deliver on the objectives that you've just set yourself. So in an unclear and a changing situation that's possibly just happened, and not all the facts are readily available yet, there's a lot of confusion about what happened, why it happened, and so on, you're really going to want to kind of focus down on the fact, on the evidence, and on the simple instruction that you know about at that particular point in time. You're really going to want to protect your most senior leaders as the most reliable source of information, both within and outside of the organisation, and you're going to want to keep staff really updated with lots of opportunity for Q&A, but perhaps less opportunity for consultation and debate and discussion at this time, because what you're doing is you're focusing on what you know right now and what you need to understand in order to move through the situation. But as time moves on, information is going to become more available. Everyone involved in the crisis is going to have a clearer picture of what happened, what's likely to happen next, and what's likely to perhaps not happen next. And this is the point where you might find a creative campaign is helpful to focus on a specific need or to focus on a call to action. So this would involve a much wider range of activity to support your key messages. It's going to introduce much more peer-to-peer communication, and it's going to introduce a lot more opportunity for idea sharing, storytelling, and so on. Basically, what I'm trying to say to you is right at the very start of the crisis hitting, when you don't really know what's happening and you perhaps don't know how it's going to unfold, you want to try and control and centralise, really simplify the messages as much as you can, and just keep people updated. And then as things become clear and you understand how your employees are going to be involved in the recovery, you want to start really engaging them more, asking them to participate in the communication, make sure they're having the chance to share their opinions, their views, their feedback, and you might want to do something a little bit more creative to kind of help the messages stick and to engage hearts as well as minds. Either way, keep the messages clear, keep them simple, keep them easy to understand, and make it obvious if there are things that people must do, and make the content meaningful to your own staff by using a context and a language that they understand. So if there's context, if there's language that you tended to use in the organisation before, stick where it's appropriate, stick where it feels natural to that kind of communications philosophy. But at the same time, you might also want to think about campaigns that you were running before the crisis hit and whether it's appropriate to continue with them. And I think this is a really important question to ask yourself. In my own experience, what I've tended to find is that people take a little bit of comfort from some of the normal campaigns, just with little tweaks made to them. It gives a sense of stability, it gives a sense of normalcy, and so can be helpful. But at the same time, it's really, really easy to misjudge. So particularly if the crisis was formed from within the organisation and something's gone very, very, very badly wrong, your employees could feel that the messages that you were putting out previously, or the money that you're spending, how you're spending it, and so on in your different campaigns no longer feels appropriate, and it's no longer something that they welcome. So if you're unsure about that, I would always look at the business as usual communication through the lens of the crisis, and just lose anything that doesn't feel genuine or doesn't feel authentic anymore. Regardless of whether you drop normal activity that feels a wee bit frivolous, there are some basic needs that you should probably continue to meet. And some things are common to us all, regardless of the situation, and you're going to want to continue to make sure that your internal communications is meeting the needs that people have. So it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but make sure that you have accessible channels in place so all staff know what's happening, what it means, what they should do, and try to make sure that even in the most difficult of times, the do message, what you want them to do, the behavioural changes you need them to make, is role modelled and endorsed right from the top of the organisation. Continue to encourage genuine and meaningful thank yous, both within teams and on an organisational wide level. Recognise what people are going through, what they're doing for the company, and show that that effort is valued. Recognise people's emotions, their fears, their anxieties, or even their pride in a good job done in moving the organisation out, and respond to those emotions in a very human way. And as things calm down, and the road to recovery becomes clear, start to look to see how you can give staff a real opportunity to share ideas and negotiate or debate the issues with the top team, so they're going to feel more ownership and a greater desire to help the organisation succeed. As you would with internal communications in normal times, you need to be aware of the different needs that different employee groups have. So remember that staff directly or more dramatically affected by the crisis will have more intense needs than those who aren't, and cater for these as a priority. But also remember, when clarity and simplicity is going to be such a key focus of your comms activity, you also want to avoid overwhelming people with irrelevant and overly complex information. So it's useful to segment your audience and to target specific content appropriately. I think if in doubt, use common sense, use care, use courtesy, and think about the information that people are going to want and need from you at every time. Try to cater for that from their point of view, rather than from the point of view of someone right in the heart of the crisis management team who might be wanting to give people much more information than they're able to kind of take in and understand and digest. So think about it from the point of view of the audience. If there is a lot of detail, a lot of complex information, you can always offer that as a resource that people can kind of go and seek out themselves, rather than have it kind of landing in their inbox every day when they're trying to just kind of get their head around the basics of what's happened. If you're new to internal comms and you haven't done much audience analysis yet, if you haven't done stakeholder mapping yet, I've also put up a handout for that as well, again in the sidebar on the side of your screen. So you know, please do download that if you think that would be helpful to you. So your messaging strategy in a time of crisis should be as simple as possible. It should work hand in hand with your external messages, and it should help to achieve your SMART objectives about think, feel, or do. At the same time, if it's going to be trusted and believed by your employees, it needs to reflect what's really happening around the organisation, and it needs to show an understanding of the frustrations, the emotions, the fears that people feel. So factual, relatable statements that explain what's in it for me and why should I care are much more likely to be accepted and embraced. And if you need people to do something differently, you need to be clear that you're giving them a direction rather than giving them a choice. And just as you would within an external comms strategy, always try to use the 5 C's or the CARE model to show the organisation cares about staff and to give evidence that senior managers are doing the right thing to make things better. So the 5 C's are concern, show concern for what's happening. In some situations, you may want to apologise, in others, you may not. And that's a decision that's to be taken more widely within the whole of the strategic organisation, and have very clear reasons for doing that. But you certainly want to offer concern, even if the situation doesn't demand a direct apology. You're going to want to be very, very clear about the things that we've talked about already, what happened, why it's happened, what it's going to do next. You're also going to want to show that this organisation and the leadership of this organisation is in control, and you want to give evidence that shows that control, shows that there's a level of confidence and competence in the organisation. And you can follow that kind of 5C model in pretty much every crisis situation, and it will always enhance your communications, in my experience. A similar thing people use instead of the 5 C's is CARE, where they talk about concern, action, reassurance. There's many of the kind of same concepts behind the messaging here, but again, it's just showing the organisation cares what's happening, it's taking action to fix it, and you can be rest assured that we're going to do everything we can to minimise the harm and damage that's been caused. Okay. And you also, finally, as I mentioned before, you want to continue to recognise success, and you want to provide something meaningful for your employees to work toward. And then next to their personal experience, the behaviour of the leaders within the organisation at a time of crisis is really the biggest indicator of message authenticity as far as staff are concerned. So they're going to be making their minds up about the crisis based on partly what you tell them, but also what they're experiencing and how they're seeing other people react. So confident leadership is absolutely vital in terms of keeping people on track, keeping them motivated and so on. This means that you need to be make sure that at all different levels within the organisation, your leaders are visible. Make sure that they're seen to be listening. Make sure that they're leading and role modelling behaviour from the front. And that applies equally to line managers as it does to senior leaders and to supervisors and so on, because people will always look to their next level leader and take cues from them. So it's really important that those people are supported to do the job. Diarise time for leaders to get out and about to visit employees and to take their questions. If you can't do that, make sure that they're able to host online chats or conferences, help them to see the situation from an employee perspective, make sure they're well equipped with the other tools and information they need to communicate well, and basically do everything that you can to help them do the communications job as well as they possibly can in a confident and competent manner. Similarly, you're going to want to choose your senior spokespeople wisely as well. Make sure that you choose senior leaders that are liked and well respected by your employees, and also the ones who can deliver difficult information in a clear and open manner. So you're going to want people who are confident and competent enough to kind of broad shoulder the difficult messages, answer the difficult questions, be open, be transparent, show that they care, and really show that they're taking responsibility for leading the organisation through the crisis. And again, you're going to want to make sure that they have all the latest information to hand, and you're going to really want to try and guide them and encourage them to speak with care, speak with humility about what's happened, what they're doing to fix it, and what they need from other people. And once you're kind of out of the direct heat of the crisis and all the facts are clear and you know where you're going and what everybody needs to do in order to help the organisation move forward, you're going to want to bring in other voices as well. So you're going to want to bring in staff from all sorts of different areas to tell the story of recovery, to maintain interest and momentum in the business recovery process, and to motivate different groups of employees in different ways. So this is really important actually, because messages that are delivered by peers are often considered to be more authentic than messages that are delivered by leaders, and they're also really effective in building a kind of a shared sense of community or team. So they're really valuable and they shouldn't be overlooked as part of the overall comms strategy. Another thing that obviously shouldn't be overlooked as part of the overall comms strategy is your communication channels. You may already have a kind of communications infrastructure in place. What I would encourage you to do is just quickly review that to make sure that it's still relevant. A good example, obviously, at the moment being the fact that face-to-face communication during the time of COVID-19 is no longer possible for many people because of social distancing. So we've had to come up with innovative and creative and very fast solutions to make sure that we're still achieving the effects of face-to-face without kind of getting too close to each other. And it's the same in any kind of crisis that you might face. For example, your technology might be down, you may not have access to email, internet or whatever. So look at your communication channels, again, through the lens of the crisis that you're facing. In terms of the channels that you need to get the message out there, it's useful to have a mix to meet all needs, but be clear about what is the main source of the regular factual information. So this could be a daily CEO email, it could be a face-to-face huddle at the start of a shift, it could be a weekly video, or it could even be a text message. But you want to be clear, this is where the latest, most up-to-date, most factual information is coming, and this is where you know you're going to receive it at every certain time. Aside from that, the channel choice is going to be different for different organisations. But in every situation, you also need to think about including a couple of one-way channels to instruct and to inform people, and a couple of two-way channels to really engage them, make sure that they're understanding, make sure that you're getting the questions through, that you're understanding what the comment and the debate is within the organisation, so that you can tailor your messages and sometimes even your activity accordingly. You'll also want to consider access for shift patterns and for remote workers, and you want to think about other needs such as speed or feedback, or as I said before, kind of understanding how some of your usual channels might not be appropriate or might require some tweaks. So again, if you're kind of new to internal comms, or if you don't have a robust communications infrastructure in place within your organisation just now, we have come up with another handout, and that's handout 3. It's in the side panel as well, and really that just tells you about some of the different internal comms channels that are available to you, and the kind of pros and cons of using them in different situations. It's not specific to crisis, but I think it's actually really useful if you're just kind of trying to decide what communications infrastructure you want to put in place. One of the things people often ask is, should we introduce new channels during a time of crisis? My gut reaction to that is sometimes no, because you're going to have so much on your plate. But at the same time, if you feel that something really branded and recognisable, labelled around the crisis, and the strategic objectives, the comms objectives you have around the crisis, whether it be a video or a kind of a weekly briefing or a daily briefing, is going to help the situation, then that's something that you would definitely consider. Again, I would just link it to your objectives, so be very clear why you're developing a new communications channel at this point in time when you're going to be so busy anyway. Okay. So we're kind of coming to the end of the webinar now, and the last thing that I want to talk about is measurement and evaluation. It's really important to measure your impact, and this helps you show your worth, but it also helps you learn for the next time. So it's valuable to you as an internal communicator in two quite distinct ways. I think if you can, make sure that whenever you're doing your measurement and your evaluation, really try to link back to your SMART objectives. And if the situation's evolved from the point at which you kind of set those objectives, and make that clear when you're delivering your kind of the findings around your measurement and your evaluation, always think about think, feel, do, and show within your measurement how you managed to kind of achieve that, remembering that evaluation goes far beyond what you did and focuses on things like changes in behaviour and perception and so on. And obviously, you're also going to want to show support for external comms activities. You're also going to want to show how you supported the crisis response and how you helped the organisation return back to business as usual through your internal communications activities, your messages, your channels, and so on. Okay. The last thing for me really to say is to remember that we're all human. We're going through, some of us at the moment, a really difficult time just now. Those of us who are not necessarily focusing on the current situation as a crisis, but maybe involved in crisis comms in the past or in the future will know this as well. We're all human, and crisis communication can be incredibly stressful. So don't forget to take care of yourself, and remember that you can only do so much. Hopefully you're going to have lots of people around you who you can talk to and who can support you when things get challenging. But even if it feels like you don't have that, particularly in the workplace, always know that you're not alone. If you want to talk to someone different, an incredible thing that the CIPR is doing just now is that they've introduced a new mental health hotline where you can speak on the phone to a qualified counsellor free of charge 24 hours a day. I think that's a brilliant thing for the CIPR to have done, and I would really encourage you to call them if you need help. and kind of take care of yourself and understand that asking for help, asking questions and feeling a little bit low during times of crisis or feeling a little bit emotional, particularly in really challenging crisis where you may be in a very small team, is absolutely normal. Okay. So with that, it's time for me to say thank you very much again for tuning in today. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm not a huge fan of doing webinars, I will be honest, but I've enjoyed today, and what I'm really looking forward to is to taking your questions and your comments over on social media. So if you want to pop over to Twitter just now, I'll be there. I'll be really happy to take any questions that you have. And I'll also be really interested in any comments or any other ideas that you'd like to share with the wider group of people. So remember, just use the hashtag and handle that we've put up on screen. And also remember that this is one of a range of different webinars that we're offering to help you through the challenges of COVID-19. So next week, I think the subject is effective people management. And then the weeks after that, we'll cover other subjects that might be helpful to you. So please do tune in again. Okay, thank you very much.